All right, welcome everyone to NCARB Live. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on the architect registration examination and our migration from Prometric to PSI. Today, Michelle and Jared, our staff experts, are going to kick things off by reviewing some of the key things you need to know about the migration. And after that, we'll be joined by two pilot testers who can talk about the candidate's experience in more detail. So Michelle and Jared, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here for NCARB Live. My name is Michelle Cohn. I'm Assistant Vice President of Examination here at NCARB, and I have been here for coming up on 8 years now, working on all aspects of exam development and delivery. And prior to joining NCARB, I was practicing architecture here in Washington, D.C. So I've been through the licensure process, and I'm glad to talk to everyone about it today. Jared?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jared Zurn. I'm the Vice President of Examination here at NCARB, and I've actually been in NCARB now over 13 years working on all things examination. So we're excited to show you a little bit more about how the migration is going to work today. So we have this little presentation we want to start off with, and then we're going to lead into the experience conversation.
All right, so Jared, you should be able to see my screen here about taking the ARE with PSI. Yes. So we will kick it off then. So a big thing that we want to highlight for everyone, hopefully you saw the email on Tuesday that migration to PSI is now available for candidates that qualify. So how do you know if you qualify? If you are done testing with Prometric, meaning you don't have any exams scheduled with Prometric and you are not waiting on any score reports from an exam you took with Prometric, then if you still have open eligibilities, then you are ready to migrate to PSI. One thing I do want to highlight is that you will keep any unused exam seats. So if you had pre-purchased 1 seat credit or 5 seat credits, however many, or exam seats, once you migrate to PSI, those seats migrate right along with you. So you will not lose those when you choose to migrate to PSI. Or you can continue testing with Prometric. That's completely fine as well. A reminder that the last day to test with Prometric is May 31st of this year. So just a little bit over a month away. And any candidate who has not migrated by May 31st will be migrated by our system in early June. Jared, why don't you talk about what candidates will see once they do migrate?
Yeah, and for those of you who have migrated, this now looks familiar to you. So if you have not migrated, get ready, because this is what the exams tab is going to look like for you in the future. And so we did redesign this in a way that we hope is much more customer friendly. And what you'll see, instead of kind of a long list of exams from the previous version of the exams tab, we now gave you these little content sensitive boxes here for practice and project management, each of the 6 divisions. But one of the key things you want to be able to do is like schedule a division. So if you're still testing, you want to schedule an exam, that's that blue button right there with the drop down. You simply can click on that button. You'll see a list of all of your remaining divisions. You simply click the division you want to schedule, and that's going to lead you through the scheduling flow. And one thing I'll point out that's an improvement as we've migrated to PSI is that with Prometric, you were required to purchase an exam seat before you even looked for an exam appointment. That is not the case with PSI. So if you have exam seats on credit, like Michelle mentioned, fantastic. Those have migrated with you, and you can use those to schedule appointments. But you now can go click on this button, pick a division that you're interested in scheduling, look at available appointments, and even select the appointment time before you would enter any payment information. So we've been hearing, for many years, candidates kind of wanted to have the best of both worlds, which is let me buy exam seats if I want to buy exam seats, but don't make me buy exam seats. And so one of our improvements for you all is that now you're going to have that choice. You can still bulk purchase exam seats if that works for you, or if your firm's willing to do that for you, or you can just pay as you go only as you're selecting an appointment time. The other thing I want to point out on this is the schedule test run button. So you've heard us talk about test run before, And Test Run allows anybody who's interested in online testing to go take a sample experience of online testing. And you're going to hear our panelists talk a little bit more about this today. Test runs are no cost to you. They take about 30 minutes to go in and complete. It allows you to go through the check-in procedures, make sure your computer works with the software, actually experience the exam driver a little bit. It's just about getting comfortable with online testing before you test. And then I guess the last thing I will show you is when it comes to scheduling these online test runs, it really does help you understand that check-in process. And that's critical because the check-in process with PSI is slightly different than the check-in process with Prometric. In essence, all the same security is there, but the way they want you to record videos of your space is a little bit different. So please, for everybody, even if you've done online testing with Prometric, please do a test run with PSI before you take your first online exam. And I'm going to hand it back to Michelle to preview some of the other, I think, very exciting resources that are coming inside of your exams tab.
Great, thanks, Jared. So Jared just went over what you will see in your exams tab after you migrate to PSI. Once you scroll down below those 6 boxes for the 6 divisions, towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see this new section titled Additional Resources. And so this is your one-stop shop for all of those resources that you might need as you are making your way through the ARE. So I'll just kind of highlight a couple of things here. Taking the ARE with PSI, that actually takes you to a web page that PSI developed specifically for NCARB candidates that gets into a lot of the what to expect questions about PSI test centers and PSI online proctoring. You can see here a link to our ARE 5.0 guidelines. For any of you who have credits from taking ARE 4.0, we still have that link to the transition calculator. We also have that link to our ARE 5.0 community. I know many of you are active on the community, so we wanted to put that link right here where you could see it. We also have a link to those AIA contract documents. I know those are really handy for studying, but what I really want to highlight here is the practice exam dashboard. So this, we're very excited to roll this out. So as a PSI candidate, you will have access into this dashboard, which gives you the opportunity to take a demo exam, but inside this new dashboard framework, which means that, especially important, you'll be able to get scored results of your practice exams and be able to store up those exam results for reference as you're studying. The really exciting thing about it, though, also is as you're taking a demo exam through the dashboard, you'll be able to see right there in real time how you're doing on the exam. You'll find out for a particular question, what's the right answer, what's the wrong answer, that explanation for why the right answer is right, some more understanding about, in this case, what division this particular item comes from, the cognitive level for it. So really get a lot of information as you're taking that demo exam about the questions that you're seeing. Now I have this other screenshot right here. And what this is noting here is that when you're taking your demo exam through the dashboard, you can take it in practice mode, which allows you to see this information about the right and wrong answers as you're taking it. Or you can take the exam in test mode, which really mimics just like what you'll see in the test center. You would no longer have that explanation button. So you really get to mimic that experience that you'll have when you're actually taking your ARE. Either way, at the end of your practice exam, you'll be able to get a score report indicating how many questions you got correct with that full list of all of the items that you saw and the right and wrong answers, the explanations on all of them. So we're excited to be able to provide that to you. We think it'll be really helpful as you are studying. And as you might have noticed, this is called ARE 5.0 multi-division practice exam in our screenshot right here. Coming this summer, we're going to be adding more practice exams to this dashboard, and you'll actually see one practice exam for each division. So 6 new practice exams will be added to this dashboard, like I said, this summer. So right now you're kind of getting that early look, and then just stay tuned for more resources. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand this back off to Jared to go over some policies.
Certainly, Michelle. And I think I'll add about the practice exams, because I know that it's a big deal that we're delivering these. So you understand when we turn those on, which is coming as part of this migration process, they're full length. They will be fully scored. So you're going to be able to go in, take a full version of each ARE division and get feedback prior to going in and taking your live exam. And so we really do hope all of our candidates take advantage of this. You're going to hear us talk more about that as we get into the June timeframe. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sort of policies. And what I'm going to tell you is most of the policies are not changing, right? Rolling clock stays the same. One thing about the rolling clock, there were questions in our last NCARB Live about there is going to be this period of no delivery from June 1st to June 13th. So what about a rolling clock extension for candidates who are impacted by this inability to test? And so NCARB has already put in place with our vendors an automatic rolling clock extension of 14 days for all candidates that's going to happen on June 1. So on June 1, if you have a valid passing score in your NCARB record, do nothing. You're going to automatically get a 14-day rolling clock extension to any one of those divisions. The other thing that's not changing, the retest policies will continue to stay the same. You're going to have to wait 60 days to retest, and you cannot test on any one division more than 3 times in a 12-month period. And the exam fee is going to remain unchanged. It's going to stay at $235 a division. One thing we are able to change, which is going to be a benefit to you all, is that we have reduced to the point of free rescheduling. So today with Prometric, you pay to reschedule an appointment if you're within 16 business days, and you pay even more, or you pay then a little bit less if you're within the 30 business days, but you have to pay if you're in that window. With PSI, it's going to be completely free. You have up to 48 hours before your scheduled test center appointment to reschedule at no cost. You have up to 24 hours before an online appointment to reschedule at no cost. And if for some reason you end up inside of that 48-hour window, or even maybe you're still outside of it, but something happens and you decide, I need to just cancel this exam, and I do not want to take this division, you're going to be able to cancel your exam appointment, which was not an option with Prometric, for a fee of $100, and then we're going to give you your exam seat back, the $235 that you paid. That's going to basically generate a new exam seat in your NCARB account for you. So you're not going to lose it, because today, unfortunately, we had candidates, we've called them no-shows. They just wouldn't show up for their appointment, and they would lose their $235. And so I hope, honestly, no candidate ever is a no-show ever again, and that $235 just goes away. So these new policies are in place to actually give you more flexibility and actually cost you less money. Some other things to point out that are not changing, the exam itself isn't changing. The structure is exactly the same. The divisions are exactly the same. The test driver is exactly the same as it is today. So you've been studying to take your exam with Prometric, just keep on studying. It's going to be literally the exact same content that was with Prometric is going to be delivered with PSI. So, and provisional feedback is still going to be there at the end of the exam. So when you get done, you're going to be able to check your score provisionally if you want to. So one of the other things that we've talked about changing, and if you've been looking at our guidelines for delivery with PSI that are marked as draft, we've been telling you we're making changes to the score report. So this information is in our current draft guidelines with PSI delivery. I want to point this out because specifically, one of the things we did as part of the operational pilot, you're going to hear more about here in a little bit, is we tested the new score reports. And did they work? Were they confusing? Like what worked, what didn't? And we got some feedback, and we're like, yeah, honestly, the little 4-dot thing down there created confusion based on some of the new information that we're going to provide you. And what has been decided is that what candidates tend to care more about is not 4 dots. What they care about is, tell me the percent of items I got right or wrong in a content area, and tell me how that measures up. And so we're going to restructure even what you see in the draft guidelines to make this even more clear for candidates. And we really do hope that that type of very direct feedback tells you exactly where you are at on the day that you tested. So that's part of the reason we marked it draft, is we knew we were going to be getting some feedback and we may be changing some things, and we are, to be responsive. I guess the last thing I will point out is, yep, those are the draft guidelines that are on our website right now with PSI. We absolutely are going to be rolling out a final version of the guidelines once we get into that, like the last few days before we launch with PSI. these things aren't going to change much. Honestly, the only thing I think we know we're going to change now is that graphic around the score report. Everything else is staying pretty much exactly the same. So on that note, we're ready to start talking to our operational pilot testers and to answer any other questions that you may have. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Michelle and Jared, for sharing all of that great information. As I mentioned at the start, we are joined today by two pilot testers, Khris and Evan. So can you both tell us a little bit more about yourselves and maybe share where you are with the ARE? Khris, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Khris Kirk. I work at Core 3 Design here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm a project manager here at my office. I've been testing since 2017, and I just passed my 4th exam a couple weeks ago, and I have 2 more exams to go left.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, Evan.
Hi, my name is Evan Berger. I work in Albuquerque, New Mexico at Arcus Architects. I started testing at the beginning of 2020. Unfortunately, 2020 kind of threw my schedule off, as it did a lot of us. So I started retesting again when I got the ball rolling in 2021. And this pilot test was actually my last test, which I passed. So I am actually officially finished with the AREs.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. So before we jump into the Q&A, we're going to ask Khris and Evan to just share a little bit more about their testing experience with us, because you can hear from NCARB all day, but hearing from fellow candidates, I think, means more. So Khris, you tested at a PSI test center. Can you tell us what it was like, maybe what the key differences were from testing with Prometric?
Yes. So the first thing I had to research before going is because when I tested at Prometric, they would always send an email about their policies, specifically about masks mandates as of late. And I never received that information. So I had to go to the PSI website because I was a little afraid of if I didn't show up with my mask that they would send me home. And I was terrified of that. So I did my research in it and I had to bring a mask. That was good on my part. And I got there. And it was I was unsure about what needed to happen because at Prometric, they have like a small room where you check in and then they take you back to go to do to logging into a computer before you can go to your computer. And then this at the PSI, it was just one open room with some seating and then 2 tables with people and then another table. So I kind of came in really awkward, like not knowing what to do. And the woman just said, that table over there, which had a bunch of papers on it, is where I had to sign in for policy about whether I've been exposed to COVID or not. So that was an option that they had online, but only if it was directed to you. So my center, they had the paperwork there for me. So that was different than Prometric is signing different sheets of paper saying that I'm not positive, I haven't been exposed, I'm not sick situation. And so they had that ready for me. As soon as I got that, I sat in a chair. Each of the chairs had a bag that was like security locked for them. Instead of at Prometric, they had like a locker system against the wall. And so once I sat down, I had to wait for them to call my name up to check me in. And before they called me up, I had to take everything out of my pockets, just like Prometric. I had to pull my sleeves up, just like Prometric. Had to do a little spin to show that there was nothing like on my person, and then, pull up my pants to show my ankles were clear and everything. I had to put everything in the bag that was on the chair with me. That included my phone. I wear a watch that's electronic, so I had to take that off. But before I put everything in there, everything had to be shut down, including my watch, which was new. Before I could just take my watch off and leave it in the locker, no problem. But this time they were very adamant about turning everything off. And then when I got up there, I was there. They made sure to tell me I was their first person doing the ARE, so it was new for them as well. And the testing, the check-in testing was actually pretty simple. Big difference was at Prometric, they took your picture every single time. At this one, they didn't take my picture. I even asked them about that. They're like, nope, no requirements. I was like, okay, no picture required. Then they pulled up my NCARB number, which was important to go along with the testing. And they said that I had to know this number, and I don't know my NCARB number. So I was like, okay. After that, they took me to the room. I was lucky and I got an ADA room, which was separate, but everything in there was just as similar as you would have it Prometric, which was the computer was there. The cameras were obviously there. They had the earphone headset, which is great. I use those all the time for my exams to help me focus. And so she brought me in, sat me down, and I needed to know my NCARB number to be able to log into the system. Whereas at Prometric, they would go sign you in and everything, and then come get you to bring you to where the computer was to start your exam. This one, they just brought me in and like sat me with me. So she had to go back to the computer to write down my NCARB number on a sticky note. And when she logged me into that, the only difference was they had another policy form that popped up that I had to read and agree to for PSI's policy. But once I got past that, the whole exam was the exact same as NCARB. There was no issues. I didn't take my break, so I didn't have to go through the policy, but she did tell me about it before I went in, that if I needed to take my break, I would come out and sign the paperwork to check out, and then come back in after my break was over. The only difference with the bag situation is after I put everything in my bag, including my ID and everything, because there's nothing that was on my desk besides the keyboard and mouse. Even at Prometric, they made you keep your ID on there so they knew who you were the whole time. That was not the case at PSI. But I took the bag with me. She locked it up. They only had the keys to it. There was no way I could get into the bag. And the bag came with me to my desk, which was different for me because before I was just in a locker where I would have a key in a separate room. And then after I finished my exam, I came out and signed out and gave her the bag back so she could give me access to my bag. And that was it. Nothing else was different. The ladies there were very kind and excited for me, and yeah.
Great, thank you. So a few key differences, but nothing crazy. Evan, so you tested online. Do you want to answer the same question? What was it like testing with PSI, and any key differences?
Sure. So I took a few online exams with Prometric. So I'll just try and go through all the differences that I noticed, which when it comes to the check-in is actually an extremely different process. The first part of it, when you go to Prometric and you have to sign in, you got to find the email, you got to look for all of your confirmation numbers, you got to make sure all those line up, you have to make sure that the test is the test that you're taking. And then when they come on, a person comes on and goes through the check-in process. With PSI, it's completely different. The launch your exam is actually right there in your My NCARB, which is such a better system because you don't have to look for those confirmation numbers. You don't have to make sure you have the right emails or anything like that. It tells you what exam you're launching. It even gives you a clock. So for example, I looked at my NCARB the day before I could get into it, and it told me I had 23 hours to clock in. And that told me that I could clock in a half an hour early. You can't clock in before that, which is great. It just answered all the questions that I needed. With PSI, you're not face-to-face with a person. The way they do it is the same way where they take a picture of your license. Again, make sure that you have a webcam that can focus, even if it's manual, you can focus that, or auto, so that they can read your license clearly. And then what they have you do is they have you take short 15-second videos of your room and your person. And then after you upload those videos, which takes no time at all, they have a proctor review that. And then once they're done with that review, they launch your exam. One of the major things that I noticed with PSI versus Prometric was the security that Prometric does seems to be a little more intense. And what I mean by that is the proctor that you physically see when you're going with Prometric, they they ask you to look at your desk. They ask you to look behind your monitor, behind your speakers. They ask you to look underneath your keyboard, underneath your desk. They even ask you to like spin your chair around to make sure there's nothing in your chair, on your chair, under your chair. Then they check your person, they check your wrists, your arms. You have to pull out your pockets. You have to check behind your ears, all that stuff. With Prometric, they ask to just see the desk, do a quick turnaround of the room, and then check my wrists and behind my ears. So I never had to check my chair. I never had to check my like my pockets and stuff. They did indicate one thing: make sure your phone is nowhere near you. So they were very clear on that point, but they never actually checked if I had my phone on me, which I found very interesting. I do wear a watch, but I never wear a watch when I'm testing because I already know they're going to call me out for that. So that was never a problem. And the other thing was with Prometric, after you do your security check-in, they then go through all of the policies. They tell you about the break policy. They tell you about how to go through the exam, how to end the exam, all that stuff. They actually didn't do that with PSI. I had to know what the break policy was. I'm sure if I asked them a question, they could have answered that question. And when they launch your exam, a proctor comes up in the chat box and just says, if you have any questions, please ask me. I'm going to launch your exam now. So the face-to-face is not there anymore, but the process is just as quick. I did do a test run. So I did test runs before on Prometric, which helped me just kind of understand what was happening. Well, this test run that I did with PSI actually really helped me because Prometric has a weird thing when it comes to like the firewalls and stuff, because they lock down the computer and you can't jump into other programs. However, PSI does not lock down your computer. Because of that, they have to run another program that detects if anything else is open on your computer. And they do not allow anything else open on your computer. This does not necessarily mean programs that are open directly, but also programs that are running in the background, especially when it comes to things like Adobe Creative Cloud and Dropbox. And unfortunately, it would not let me close Dropbox. I could not figure out how to close Dropbox so that that system was not reading it was open. So I had to call customer service. And I think within 30 seconds, I got somebody to come on and I explained to them my situation. They said, oh yeah, we totally understand what's going on. And within 5 minutes, she completely walked me through exactly how to shut down everything I need to shut down. And after I got off the call, I just went right through the check-in and it was no problems, no issues. The biggest thing that I'll say that is exactly the same is the test. Once the test was launched, there was zero difference from when I took it from Prometric, and I was just in the zone of taking a test, and that's all. Everything was the same from ending the exam. Everything was the same for the provisional pass. All of that was exactly the same. I did not take a break as well. That's not because of me not wanting to go back to questions or anything. I tend to just power through tests. That's my own personal preference. So I can't actually talk about the break policies at this point.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan. All right, so from there, we're going to head into our Q&A. So viewers, go ahead and pop your questions into the Q&A tool. I know some of you already have been, so we have a few here. And our first question is one I've seen a couple variations on this, which is, I'm trying to schedule an exam with PSI, but I can't find a test center that's listed on NCARB's PSI test center list. So Jared, I know you were talking about this right before our webinar started, if you want to tackle that one.
Certainly. And so, yeah, I've been watching the chat too. And so here's one of the things we have learned at NCARB. So that list that is on our website is the list that PSI gave us and said, yes, these are all the test centers that are going to be able to deliver the ARE. And we were like, great. And that's why we put it out on our website. And what has happened is when we started doing the operational pilot, we had a couple of our operational pilot testers said, hey, I can't seem to find that test center, like my local one that I know is right down the street. And so it triggered us digging into this a little bit more. And we have discovered that there's an issue in the way PSI has some things structured in with their scheduling application. I don't want to get overly technical, but there's something in the way they have their exam capacity structured that was not allowing candidates to schedule the larger ARE divisions. So then what was happening is the scheduling software was basically skipping over that test center completely. So like I saw the chat question about like, there's all these test centers in Boston, but they're not coming up. So the reality is, my guess reading that question very quickly is, oh, PSI needs to go in and tweak some of these settings in a few of those test centers. And so they're working on that right now. Trust me, this is a hot topic for us at NCARB. We have had multiple conversations on this one, and we will continue to do so because we want all those test centers available to you as candidates. And multiple questions on this one. We're working on it. PSI is going to get their scheduling stuff tweaked out. And so it all works, and every one of those will be fully available.
And I'll just add on to that, we actually were just talking with PSI about that earlier today, very much a hot topic. It is not an issue at every test center. So I do know there are plenty of candidates who have successfully scheduled those longer divisions at test centers, no problem at all. If you do run into an issue where you think something isn't showing up here and I think it should be, reach out to our customer service. That helps us then be able to reach out to PSI and say, we're seeing an issue at this test center. And they're able to jump in there, look at those test centers, help us help you more quickly, while they're also kind of confirming on a larger scale that this issue is resolved.
All right, great, thank you. Next question. So when you were showing the new exam tab in My NCARB, where do candidates find their rolling clock information?
Sure, so it's in there, right? And I saw that chat question too. So we used to have the big circle, right? And it would sort of show the countdown of rolling clock. And that was always really reflecting when your next exam is going to expire. So in those little boxes that has like the practice management, project management, you can go in there and you can see exactly what's going on with that division. Because as you all know, right, the rolling clock really is just a 5-year expiration policy that applies to each exam based on the day you pass it. So your your expiration date is actually quite different on different divisions.
All right, our next question, Evan, I think this one is for you. So how is remote proctoring different with PSI? And I know you just listed a bunch of things a minute ago, but if you wanted to sum it up again, if anyone joined us in the last few minutes, what would you say?
Sure. So so ProProctor, if you have taken a test at Prometric recently, you will notice that the ProProctor went from a web base to an actual program, which helped the speed of it drastically. Bridge is the same way. Bridge is a program. The only difference is ProProctor gets installed onto your computer. Bridge actually has a weird, where it installs every single time you take a test, but it doesn't install onto your computer. So it doesn't stay on your computer. It only uses it when you're using it. Again, one of the major differences is the fact that you're not going to check in with a person. You're going to check in by videoing yourself. And it's going to check your computer for open programs. That's the biggest one. There is an option, just so everybody knows, there is an option when it tells you that you have such and such programs open, that you can just terminate all those programs. There's a little thing that says terminate all these programs, and it will do most of those programs. Like I had trouble with Dropbox. It was only Dropbox that I had trouble with. And then once I got Dropbox off, the terminate all worked just fine. So you don't necessarily have to search for every single one of those. There is an option for Bridge to just tell your computer to shut them all down.
So I'll jump in to help all of you. What is going to make your life way easier is whatever computer you are using to do an online exam with PSI, you need to have administrator privileges in the way you're logged into it. Because that magic little button that says, yeah, turn all these off, is basically using your administrator privileges to then terminate all those applications. So, and I know this, that some of us, like where we work, I don't have administrator privileges on my work computer. And so I actually did not use my work computer to take online exams as part of the operational pilot and our user acceptance testing. I used my trusty home Acer laptop that it worked, right? Because it was basic, I had full rights on it. And I went through exactly what Evan did, which was it told me, you can't have this turned on, you can't have this turned on. And I was like, okay, terminate all. They shut them off, and then it worked just fine. But administrator privileges is a critical thing for all of you taking online exams.
Agree. Yes. And one of the things that they did suggest was don't use a computer that has a VPN, because most of the time you won't have administrative privileges.
I'll just add one other note. Evan, earlier you had mentioned that another difference between Prometric and PSI is that with Prometric's ProProctor, it essentially is kind of taking over your computer. So ProProctor goes full screen. You don't see anything else. The start bar, at the bottom, the Windows bar like that, that's gone. Your computer is entirely taken over. PSI Bridge doesn't do that. And so when you get into Bridge, especially if you've tested previously with Prometric, you might be surprised that you can still see that bar at the bottom of your screen. I will tell you, and again, I also tested as part of the operational pilot on my home computer, just like Jared did. And yeah, that bar is still there. You can click on the start button. And as soon as you click on something, there is going to be a message that pops up from Bridge saying, looks like you're trying to open something you shouldn't. Stop. And that, you're directed right away to not open stuff. If you do and you don't see that message or you ignore that message, your proctor will see that you're trying to open other things. And so that is grounds for a violation during your exam. So I just want to put that out there. As Evan was mentioning, the security check-in was a little bit different. It is just there's a different security approach with PSI. So when you see that bar at the bottom of your screen, don't be tempted to start opening things just because it looks like you can. I do just want to emphasize that security is taken just as seriously with PSI. So really just stay within your Bridge browser. And like Evan said, once it launches, you're in the zone of just taking your exam, and you're going to completely forget about that bar at the bottom.
Okay, so some great tips if you're going to test online with PSI. Here is a test center question. So Khris, I know you said you didn't take a break, but you also said your proctor walked you through the break process. So did your proctor mention if you wanted to take a break, would you have been able to access what was in your PSI backpack?
No, not at all.
Okay.
We were not allowed to access that until the end of the exam.
Okay. So Jared and Michelle, could candidates at the test center with PSI still be able to access snacks or water during their break if they brought that to the test center?
Yeah, you should be able to. And so, Khris, thank you for that feedback. That is definitely something that we'll take back to PSI. Certainly, you are not allowed to access that locker bag during your exam. I know you mentioned that you were allowed to carry it into the testing room with you. Yep, that is standard with those locker bags, but they're locked for a reason. So it's really there just, so you're holding on to it the whole time. Your bag's not going to walk away or get mixed up with another test taker's bag. You've got it with you, but you cannot access it. Once you leave that testing room to go on break, then you would need to ask the proctor, obviously, to unlock it for you. Grab that snack that you have inside the bag, be able to take your break, just like you could take breaks during Prometric exams. And then the proctor would need to then relock your bag. And you would go through a similar check-in process with checking sleeves and pant legs and pockets and that sort of thing before going back into the testing room. So Khris, thank you for letting us know that the TCA implied that you couldn't access your bag, because certainly we know these are long exams. I can certainly vouch for myself. When I took the ARE, I absolutely needed that cold drink and the granola bar halfway through. So we will follow up with PSI on that one.
Okay. Michelle and Jared, a migration question. Why would some candidates not be able to see the option to migrate in their record?
Sure, I'll jump in. So as Michelle had kind of mentioned earlier, we said there's sort of the if you qualify language right now. And the two things that are going to cause a current candidate with eligibilities to not be able to migrate is if you have an appointment scheduled with Prometric, you cannot migrate, right? Because you have an appointment scheduled with Prometric and your eligibilities have to live with Prometric until that gets taken care of. The second reason is, so let's say you have an appointment and you go take that exam Saturday. You're not going to be able to migrate on Saturday evening because we have to wait for that exam score to process through the system. So really, once you're at an end state where you have no appointment scheduled and you're not awaiting any scores and you're just sort of looking at eligibilities that could be scheduled, all of a sudden, the next time you log into your NCARB record and click on that exams tab, you're going to see that blue bar that Michelle showed earlier in the presentation, and just start the process. It's super easy. It takes about a minute to go through the migration process.
Okay. Will candidates with accommodations get the feature to schedule in real time, or will they have to wait for a phone call from PSI?
Great question. So accommodation scheduling is a little bit the same and a little bit different with PSI. The part that's a little bit the same is well, and actually I'm going to back up. If you have accommodations currently as a Prometric candidate and you choose to migrate to PSI, your accommodations will migrate with you. So I don't want candidates to worry that maybe they have to reapply for those accommodations. Not at all. That is one thing that we worked on quite a bit, through the last, months as we've been working on this. Your accommodations will travel with you from Prometric to PSI, so you should have everything that you need once you get into the PSI world. The other thing that I'll note just real quickly, I showed that screen earlier about the additional resources at the bottom of your exam tab. So a new feature as a PSI candidate, you're also going to see your accommodations at the bottom of your exam tab. So if you have accommodations and you migrate to PSI, go ahead and scroll to the bottom, open up that window. It'll show you the accommodations. If you have any concerns about what you're seeing, by all means, reach out to NCARB customer service. Once you're in the PSI world, you're ready to schedule. If you want to take an online exam, you'll be able to go ahead and schedule that exam, self-scheduled, just as a candidate without accommodations. Note that some accommodations are not allowed in an online testing format. And so our customer relations team can walk through that with you if that's the case. If you then need to test in a test center, or you prefer to test in a test center, that is where the process is a little bit different. So in that case, you will still click on schedule, you'll select test center, and then the system will prompt you to enter the best phone number to reach you at. Your scheduling request will be sent over to PSI, and within 48 hours, you will get a call back from PSI, and a representative will work with you on where you want to test, when you want to test, and they will work to get you scheduled into the test center in the time slot that you prefer. I will just throw out there, you will be getting a call back from PSI. So if you have any sort of call block set up on your phone, I know we all get those spam calls and we all do what we can to try to not get spam calls. Just keep in mind, you might be getting a call from an unfamiliar number if you request test center scheduling. So just kind of, turn off that call block, or, do what you need to do so that that call can still come through to you. Jared, did I miss anything? And there was a lot of
there was a lot there. I think part of the base question was, is NCARB going to work with PSI to look at this process and improve it in any way? And the answer is yes. We're going to continue to work with PSI. Right now, this is the best solution for PSI to serve you as a candidate, because one of the benefits of PSI is honestly they have a little more flexibility. When by doing this, wait for the phone call, they're able to get inside behind the scenes on the scheduler and even make some modifications that allow you to fit in if you have a testing accommodation, especially that requires extra time. That was something with Prometric that you were basically forced into their construct. And if you didn't fit, you didn't fit. And so we like the flexibility of PSI in helping you get a scheduled appointment. It did cause a change in the process to get a scheduled appointment.
Okay. So a question for Chris. Questions about that locked bag. Roughly, how big is it?
I would say, I mean, so I didn't have very much stuff with me and I felt the bag was way too big. But I would say it was probably about like 18 inches by maybe 24 wide. So it could definitely fit if you had brought like, I don't know, giant water bottle, it'd fit that easily. It could fit a notebook in there pretty well. Definitely snacks and stuff, but I only had my wallet, my keys, my phone, and my watch, and it was I felt ginormous. It almost, I would say it's comparable to the size of maybe a backpack, because that's kind of how I felt when I was carrying it to my chair. And when I took it to my chair, the proctor was like, "You can just hang this on the back of your chair. There should be a lip that you can just hang it on." So I hope that answers your question.
That's very
I'll
helpful.
just add on there, it's maybe about the size of a small backpack, but you would not be able to fit a backpack inside of it.
No,
So, because
no.
it's sort of like a flat, like
Yeah.
drawstring type bag in a way. So I agree, Chris, when I tested at a test center, I mean, I had like a small umbrella because it was rainy that day, like a sort of like a compact umbrella, not a giant golf umbrella. Like my
Right.
umbrella fit inside there, my wallet, my keys, cell phone, all of that, I agree. But if I had had like a backpack or like a laptop bag, that might have been pushing it.
Yeah.
So do recommend that you keep those larger items, you know, at home or in your car. So.
Okay, great. I know we're getting close to time here, so I'm going to try to speed run through some of the rest of the questions. Okay. So for our pilot testers, did you get your scores right away from your pilot exams?
I got the provisional answer at the end of my exam. And then I definitely checked the NCARB page every day for like 4 days before I got my score back. But it took 4 days. It's definitely much faster this time around because I was one of the testers for the 5.0 version, you know, back in 2017, and that took months. So this was a lot faster for sure.
Okay, so my experience is a little bit different, and it's already been explained to me why it was different. So this question kind of is really only for the pilot testers. I tested on not this Monday, but last Monday. And I got my provisional pass. So that was right away. I understood that I had passed. That was instantaneous, just like it is in Prometric and all that stuff. But I actually didn't get my score until literally 20 minutes ago. It dropped in the middle of this. However, again, with that said, it was very specifically explained to me that it's because of the test pilot. They were going through certain checks and everything because they were test piloting. And as soon as it switches over back to the general public testing with the PSI, it's going to be the exact same as Prometric, where it's basically 24 hours and your score should drop.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, Chris, go ahead, and then I'll.
I was going to say that the only difference between when I tested and when Evan tested is I tested at the very beginning of when we were allowed to be testing. So I was one of the first ones. And then he tested towards the end when like a lot of people tried testing. So that's the difference of why I got mine sooner versus him, because I did it when there was less people at the very beginning.
Correct.
You're right. And full transparency from an NCARB perspective, so you know, when we were holding scores because we're doing like our super due diligence to make sure everything's coming through 100% correct. When we go fully live on June 14th with PSI, we're going to do that. We're still going to kind of do a separate little check just to be sure, probably on June like 14th, 15th, and 16th. So if you are somebody who has an appointment scheduled in one of those first 3 days, it may take until the 17th for your score to drop. Your score may drop on the 16th, but we're like, come on, we're not going to just like flip the switch and walk away. That's not what we do. We're definitely going to be like making sure every results file is coming through, it's accurate. But just like Chris and Evan said, your provisional feedback is still going to happen in the test center. It just may take an extra day or two to get that official score report in your record.
All right, so both of our pilot testers mentioned they did not take a break during their exam. So Jared, Michelle, can you clarify, if you do take a break, are you still going to have those items locked that you saw before your break?
Yes, this again, no changes to the way this exam is being delivered with Prometric today.
Okay, great. Question for our pilot testers. Is it easier to take exams online or in person?
I think this is a personal opinion. It depends on how you are with testing. I don't like doing stuff at my apartment where I live because I have an animal, so that would make it really hard for me to focus. I also live across from a bar, so that also makes it really hard to focus. So for me, I find it easier to go to a testing center because then I don't have to worry about any of those items, and then I'm working with a person in person. But that's just how I test. I have friends that test other ways and they prefer. Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's completely personal choice. The exam is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether you go to a testing center or you do it online. Once you're taking the test, it's literally exactly the same. For me, I actually suffer with a little bit of anxiety. So going to a testing center kind of rises that anxiety pretty hardcore. So the fact that I had the option to not go to a testing center just put my mind at ease and focus more on the test than the fact that I'm in a testing center. I did take one of my tests at the testing center, and the fact that you're surrounded by other people taking tests, if you do want silence, you have to put the earmuffs on. And personally, when I put the earmuffs on, after 3 hours of it, it really started to hurt. And I didn't like that. At my house, I have the ability, I have a full office to myself. I can close the door, I can close out everybody else. Everybody in my house understands I'm testing. Do not make any noises for 4 hours. So for my personal choice, the testing was much easier. The test itself was exactly the same. There was no difference whether or not that was easier or harder. But again, it's completely a personal choice on how you want to do it.
I will say, continuing what you said, like with the earmuffs specifically, I agree that having people next to you can be very distracting, which is why I really was happy that the earmuffs were at this testing center, because I was afraid I was going to get there and they weren't going to be there, because I rely on those. But advice for those people that do test at the center and they want to get used to it. What I do at home when I take my practice exams before going, I have earmuffs of my own that I will practice for like 5-6 hours a day when I'm taking my practice exam. So that way I can get used to the feeling of it so it won't bother me. I even did it with like a mask on as well, just so I would know what it feels like so I wouldn't have any anxiety or woes about it when I actually got to the testing center.
All right. So on a related note, and Michelle, maybe you can answer this one. Can candidates still take earplugs to the test center?
Candidates would be actually every PSI test center has earplugs, or like the soft foamy things to put in. Yeah, I believe candidates could take them actually. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at that particular policy in a while, but my experience testing at PSI test centers during the operational pilot and hearing from others is that every center has those earplugs actually just sitting on the desk ready for you to take them. So candidates should have that option actually just provided to them.
Okay, great. And then one more quick one, which is, is NCARB still offering the $50 gift card for candidates who are taking their first online exam?
Yes, I can take that one too. Yep, your first online ARE division that you schedule for will get you that $50 gift card. If you have already taken online proctoring with Prometric, then you won't see a new $50 when you schedule your first online test with PSI. So just want to make it clear that this is for your first online division in one provider, not for both. But definitely encourage everyone, if you haven't tried out online proctoring before, yes, that benefit is still there for you.
Okay, And one more question before we head into our wrap up, which is, and I know we talked a little bit about some things we want to address with PSI before June 14th, but from Khris and Evan's description, this question is, it sounds like there's still some glitches maybe in the check-in process. Is that something that NCARB is going to address with PSI prior to the June 14th full launch date?
Yeah, the nice way is absolutely. We know this, right? Like we're a new test publisher, for PSI. They have hundreds and hundreds of test centers. It's going to take a little bit for every one of those test centers to get fully up to speed. We're committed to obviously calling PSI out on this and be like, hey, we heard from this candidate, or we heard from this operational pilot tester. Michelle was saying we met with them this morning. We meet with them on a very regular basis, and we talk a lot about our expectations of customer service to you, the candidate. And they're committed to it, and we're committed to it.
Okay, great. And with that, we'll close out, and I'd like to ask each of you to maybe share a key takeaway about the PSI migration. So Khris, we'll start with you.
All I can say, if you're gonna go in, just go in as if it's the same as it was before. Just study as hard and just don't focus on the security aspects of it. You know what you know, and you'll feel it when you're in there.
Great. Evan?
So I'd say a couple of things. One, just like Khris said, focus on the test. That's what you're there for. Don't worry about who is actually giving you that test. They will get you through it no matter what. The PSI transition for me seems like it was as smooth as it can be. There was no real, oh my God, this is completely different. I would also say, just going off the conversation today, the ARE guidelines, 5.0 guidelines are out there. Read those before you go into a testing center. And the reason why is because of those little key things that you're allowed to do on a break. When a center tells you, hey, you can't do that, you can then push back and say, no, NCARB tells me I can do that. Can you please review your policy so that I can have my proper rights on this specific policy? It just helps everyone. I get candidates ask me that one a lot. So just be sure to understand what you're doing before you go into it. But once you're into it, focus on the test. That's what you're there for. Just take the test.
Okay, Michelle?
Oh gosh, I mean, we've shared so much information today. And I don't want people to feel like, oh my God, that was an hour's worth of talking, and what if I missed something? So much of this is covered in the NCARB guidelines. Jared mentioned that earlier. We're going to be releasing that final version as we get closer to the launch day, but the version that's up there is super duper close to what that final is going to be. So don't put off reading it because you heard that there's going to be an update. Go ahead and read through it. I hope that answers a lot of folks' questions. I know we'll be posting a recording of this webinar also. And so I just want to give an extra thank you to Evan and Khris for sharing your experiences. I think this has been helpful for me. I mean, I jotted down some notes as well, and I hope it's been helpful for our candidates too.
Okay, and Jared?
Again, a big thank you to both Khris and Evan, and honestly, all of our operational pilot testers out there. There have been hundreds of you taking your time, going out. We know not everything was perfect. We kind of knew that was right. That was the reality, but you're helping make this experience better for every other candidate who's going to come after you. So again, thank you so much. And Jenny, to answer your question, I guess one of my key takeaways is something we didn't talk about, and I want to make sure we address it on this NCARB Live, which is if you are a candidate today that has an exam seat in your account, but that exam seat is going to expire in the very, very near future. One of the real opportunities you have right now is you don't have to let that expire. Your exam seat only has to be used to schedule an appointment. You don't have to take the appointment by the date of expiration. So if you're sitting on an exam seat and let's say it's going to expire in 3 weeks and you are not ready to take an exam in 3 weeks, you could migrate to PSI. You can schedule an appointment with that exam seat right now, and you could schedule an appointment for July, let's say. And then if you're still not ready in July, you can reschedule at no cost. Remember, we talked about that earlier. So again, one of the ways the policies have changed is I really hope that we don't hear from candidates saying, oh, my exam seats are expiring, because book a seat time. and then reschedule it if you need to, as you get within that 5-day period at no cost. So please don't waste your money, and don't waste your exam seats. So I wanted to make sure we did talk about that today. And it's unfortunate it's the very last thing we're saying.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our viewers who joined us today. If you asked a question and we didn't have time to answer it, you can reach us at ncarb.org/contact, or you can drop it on our blog or social media, and be on the lookout for more ARE updates in the future. Thank you.